Tetsuya Nomura is hands down one of the most captivating and interesting figures in the video game industry. His original ideas and iconic style have played a large part in some of Square Enix's most successful titles. Whether you love his crazy story designs and concepts, or you think he's actively ruining video games as we know it, he's a big name in the industry. And he's a hard worker. Even today, Nomura bounces between projects frequently, and based on my research for this video series, has had projects in circulation since 1991. Hi, my name's Joe. When I like something a whole lot, I want to find out what's going on behind the curtain. This video is that. I did the research and write-up for my benefit, but I did this video part for yours, so I can pass on this information as completely and definitively as possible without boring my friends and family. In this video series, I will examine all of Tetsuya Nomura's works to the best of my ability. I understand there are countless videos available regarding the very start of his career, so some information may be quite familiar to you if you frequently watch videos on this topic. But I've done my best to make what you watch here today a smidgen more informative and entertaining than videos before. And before long, we'll be in uncharted territory. I'll include all of my sources in the description below, and I'll include a number on screen if I am citing a source. I'll also include fun facts and text boxes on screen to give you some bonus information if you're actively watching the video. I've grouped each project as accurate to development as possible, but Nomura would sometimes be bouncing between 4 to 5 projects at a time. So I've arranged all titles in order of release, with out-of-place blurbs about relevant titles if necessary. Now that everything's out of the way, let's dive into the prolific career of Tetsuya Nomura.
More than 200 animators and programmers. A multi-million-dollar production. Over 2 years in the making. And a cast of thousands. They said it couldn't be done in a major motion picture. They were right. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
With the breakout success of Final Fantasy VII, Square had achieved a strong foothold in the Western market. The company was achieving new heights after diving into the industry-wide shift to 3D, especially after creating the most popular JRPG to date. Dream Factory, a subsidiary of Square, would riff on this success by including characters from Final Fantasy VII in the roster for their upcoming game, Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring. Dream Factory was a small development team of around 17 staffers, with fighting game titan Seiichi Ishii as its chairman. Ishii had his own adventures before the establishment of Dream Factory, including work as the game designer and coordinator of Sega's Virtua Fighter in 1993, and acting as director and game designer of Namco's Tekken and Tekken 2 in 1994 and 95 respectively. These 3 games were monumental in their own ways, helping push gaming and the fighting game genre forward. After these successes, and catching the eye of Hironobu Sakaguchi, Ishii left his position at Namco and established Dream Factory in November of 1995. On his team were a large portion of the team behind Tekken and even some members that worked on Virtua Fighter.
Characters designed by Akira Toriyama. Battle system features the ultimate in realism. Full 360-degree free movement battles.
Dream Factory's first project was 1996's Tobal No. 1, a fighting game similar to Ishii's previous projects, including adventure elements to change things up. The game came pre-packaged with the demo of Final Fantasy VII, which may have contributed to its great success in Japan. However, its overseas performance was not as peachy keen. Tobal No. 1 was the first 3D video game Square had published. It was also their first venture into the fighting game genre. The next entry, Tobal 2, was another stumble in sales and reception. Despite its abundance of content, the game was never released outside of Japan, due to its predecessor's performance in the West. Square had secured a deal with Namco to produce a game that would release on their Namco System 12 arcade cabinet hardware, with a console release that Square themselves would handle. The previous Namco cabinet, the System 11, was based on a prototype build of the PlayStation. The System 12 was a slight cut above 11, offering a processing speed 1.5 times faster than it on the same base hardware. Despite the rough performance of the Tobal games, Square once again reached out to Dream Factory to produce a new game for this arrangement. This game was Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring. Because of the bond between both companies, Square offered Dream Factory some of their own personnel to aid production, including Nobuo Uematsu and Shinji Hashimoto. Uematsu worked as a supervisor for usage of music from Final Fantasy VII. Hashimoto had supervised the Tobal games while working as publicity producer on Final Fantasy VII. Now, he had returned to work as supervisor on Ehrgeiz. Tetsuya Nomura would be assigned to Ehrgeiz as character designer and supervisor for the Final Fantasy VII characters. Ehrgeiz's guest characters included Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart. These two were the only Final Fantasy VII characters featured on the Namco System 12 build of the game. Once the cabinet is set up, Cloud is set to unlock 30 days after installation, and Tifa after 60. After 90 days, the cabinets will unlock Django, an original character penned by Nomura with quite an obvious influence. Django features a Player 2 palette swap that resembles Red 13, and his moveset features attacks such as Seto Punch and Nanaki Kick, among others making explicit references to Final Fantasy VII's characters and monsters. Cloud's Player 2 palette swap is red as well, though this could be tied to the appearance of second-class soldiers in Final Fantasy VII. Tifa's palette swap is red too, resembling her appearance and promotional artwork done by Yoshitaka Amano. With the PlayStation release, Sephiroth, Yuffie Kisaragi, Vincent Valentine, and Zack are added to the game's roster. Along with Cloud and Tifa, Sephiroth is immediately available to players booting up the game for the first time. The other characters have to be unlocked. Cloud and Tifa were also given new alternate costumes depicting their outfits during the Nibelheim incident. Sephiroth's alternate costume is his shirtless appearance, seen in his final confrontation with Cloud. Yuffie's is based on her original ex-soldier design, and Vincent is given an alternate costume depicting his time as a Turk. Vincent is the only character in Ehrgeiz to feature a different artwork for his alternate costume. Zack does not have an alternate costume and shares a red Player 2 palette swap with Cloud. These appearances give the characters involved all new Nomura-penned artwork and voice acting, a huge step in their likeness since their debut just a year prior. Yumi Kakazu, the Japanese voice actor for Yuffie, stuck out to the higher-ups in production when delivering her performance for Ehrgeiz. The original cast for Ehrgeiz includes fighters of all different styles and backgrounds. There is some evident inspiration from Tekken characters in the cast, mixed with a flair of ideas that could only come from Nomura. Han Daehan and Ken Godhand Mishima have prosthetics that double as ranged weapons. Prince Doza's outfit is very Nomura, with many straps around his Muay Thai gear. Another character, Yo-Yo Yoko Kishibojin, is an international police officer that fights with a yo-yo. Doubling back, it's also worth mentioning that Ken Mishima shares a last name and likeness with Kazuya Mishima, the face of the first two Tekken entries. Kazuya was replaced with his son Jin Kazama in Tekken 3, and Ken Mishima's design seems to take notes from this character as well. Whereas Ken and Django are based on fictional characters, others are inspired by real-world fighters. Dasher Inoba is based on Japanese wrestlers Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba. In-game, Inoba is both a wrestler and founder of the Ehrgeiz Championship Tournament, a parallel to Antonio Inoki's founding of New Japan Pro Wrestling in 1972. Li Shuwen is one-to-one with Li Shuwen, a historical Chinese warrior known for his mastery of Baji Chuan. Shuwen's name, cause of death, age of death, and fighting style are all echoed in his fictional counterpart. Ehrgeiz's Shuwen seems to be a resurrected and de-aged iteration of the same Shuwen from world history. Prince Doza is renamed in the English release of the game. His original name is Prince Nassim, taken directly from the real-world British boxer. Prince Doza is also British. Whether Nomura thought of these real-world ties originally or not is unknown, but given his involvement in the project, we can see that the original characters for Ehrgeiz are a sign of where he tends to look for inspiration. Nomura's artwork for Ehrgeiz uses the classic anime style he had come to be known for, but his artwork for the characters of Final Fantasy VII have a new, refined edge to them, Their proportions are more realistic in these artworks. His work here is emblematic, showcasing the dichotomy in his art style during this time period. Ehrgeiz would be a natural progression from the Tobal duology, incorporating RPG elements into a 3D fighter and using a similar gameplay style. Ehrgeiz also made use of the PlayStation's high-resolution mode, offering a natural 60 frames per second in what GameSpot journalists described as drop-dead gorgeous graphics. Ehrgeiz got a good reception. It was released and sold, and people played it in arcades. But it didn't push the fighting genre forward, or give Virtua Fighter 3 or Tekken 3 any real opponent. Despite having had a large part in creating his competition, Seiichi Ishii had not been able to surpass his old works with his new ones. Even with his experiments with RPG elements, and now the added novelty of Final Fantasy VII characters, Ehrgeiz was white noise in a sea of fighters. The game was released in Japanese and American arcades in March 1998, and received its home console release on December 7, 1998 in Japan. America did not receive it until May 4, 1999, and the rest of the world would receive it on February 8, 2000.
Following series fashion, after production wrapped for Final Fantasy VII, the team would begin talks for Final Fantasy VIII. In these talks, Yoshinori Kitase requested that the game make use of the unused sorceress Nomura drafted for Final Fantasy VII. Talks would continue for VIII, as Nomura did work for other projects within the company.
As we'll come to see, 1998 was quite the release year for Square. They had plenty of new IP releases this year, covering genres that spanned much further than JRPGs. 1998's Einhänder was a scrolling shooter that would be developed by some new talent working at the company. The game used the graphical advancements made in Final Fantasy VII, as most side entries in this era would. Einhänder, however, was the first 3D side-scrolling shooter that the company published. Notable staff include Kenichiro Fukui as composer, Yusuke Hirata as producer, and Kenichi Iwao would start his work with Square on this title as planner. Once upon a time, Iwao was employed at Capcom and had contributed greatly to 1996's
Resident Evil.
He was brought onto the project by Capcom executives, which led to frequent creative differences with Shinji Mikima, who had been working on the game longer than Iwao and saw most of his concepts wiped with Iwao's changes. This conflict ultimately led to Iwao's departure from Capcom. After he left the company, his name was erased from Resident Evil's staff roll, despite all of his hard work. Adapted from Hironobu Sakaguchi's original idea for Final Fantasy VII, 1998's Parasite Eve is a horror role-playing game most likened by critics to Resident Evil. The game takes place in New York City and follows NYPD detective Aya Brea as she fights a parasitic life form known as Mitochondria Eve. In a rare turn of events, the game's lore was not written in-house, as Parasite Eve is a sequel to the eponymous novel written by Hideaki Sena and published in 1995. Though it is a sequel to the novel, Sena was not involved at all in the game's development process. The game was entirely a work between Square and Sena's publisher. Regardless, Sena is credited on the game as writer, as tribute to his original text. Parasite Eve's development was the first time that work on a title took place between Square's Japanese and American offices, spawning its own set of obstacles for the team. Takashi Tokita would direct and write the story for Parasite Eve, and Yoko Shimomura would compose the score for this game. Hironobu Sakaguchi was a producer and brought in Tetsuya Nomura to fill the role of character designer. This project would be the first time that, after sharing credits on 3 games prior, Tetsuya Nomura and Yoko Shimomura would cross paths. While the game was widely likened to Resident Evil, the combat systems and story of Parasite Eve bear less similarity. The combat system, for one, was adapted from the turn-based systems that Squaresoft had since mastered, and allowed players to adapt their own arsenal of weapons. Given that Takashi Tokita was directing, it's no surprise that the battles could be likened to Chrono Trigger. The stories for both Resident Evil titles available in '98 are largely bioweapon-based, while Parasite Eve's mythos used mitochondria and human cells to peddle its narrative, in line with the original novel. Their aesthetics are similar,
but upon closer inspection, Parasite Eve is its own creation. Square's cinematic RPG was built on a modified engine of the one used for Final Fantasy VII, once again featuring pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, and polygonal character models. Square's CG technology was further developed, allowing for fully proportioned characters in gameplay and cutscenes, making chibi models a thing of the past. Full-motion video cutscenes are evenly distributed throughout Parasite Eve, resulting in a game that is paced more like film. This was evidently a continuation of one of Final Fantasy VII's production goals, but this time with more research and experience. All of these deviations, paired with the real-world premise of the game, offered quite a lot of room for Nomura to grow. As such, Parasite Eve was Nomura's first delve into what he identifies as his true style. When interviewed about the game, Nomura commented, "Finally, I could draw my own pictures, not like the ones before." One quick look at his art for this game confirms that his thoughts are accurate. All the projects he had been involved in thus far could not handle his level of detail quite yet. Aya Brea was thought up by Hironobu Sakaguchi. Her creation had a specific scope that he found only Nomura could accomplish, so Nomura was brought on board. Sakaguchi phoned him at home and requested Nomura design her. As it turns out, a different designer was working on the project prior to Nomura and couldn't quite replicate Sakaguchi's vision. So, Sakaguchi was kicking that person off the project to get Nomura's pen on the character. Aya was brought about by combining two different designs, a mistake Nomura made in response to a different job Sakaguchi had for him. The actual request for Nomura was to create a character with long hair and a ponytail, with hair on the sides similar to Aerith in Final Fantasy VII. Nomura incorrectly provided a character with a shorter haircut. Despite also not meeting Sakaguchi's vision, Nomura's design for Aya was accepted, Nomura was not kicked off the project, and production moved forward. Aya's name is the same as Sakaguchi's daughter, Aya Sakaguchi. It is unclear when in Aya's design process that she was given her name. In her final design, Aya is a 25-year-old woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. She wears a long black evening gown with a slit on its left side and black platform heels in the game's beginning and ending. For a majority of the game, she wears black boots with a zipper tucked under the legs of her high-waisted jeans, a white t-shirt, and a black leather jacket. For a small portion of the story, she sheds her jacket. After completing Aya's design, Nomura would move on to design the rest of the cast. Mitochondria Eve is a classic Nomurian monster. She sports an appearance similar to Culex, God Kefka, and Safer Sephiroth, with her own maternal aesthetic. Her design is also a lot less realistic than the rest of her game's cast, which allows Nomura's style to shine through even more. Technically, she was created by Hideaki Sena in the original novel. So was Kunihiko Maeda, a Japanese biologist who helped Aya on her journey. Though not confirmed, it is speculated that Nomura's design of the character is based on Sena's likeness. This would be the first instance where Nomura would pen a good amount of key arts and promo artwork for a title he was working on. He had done some illustration work before, but for Parasite Eve, Nomura drew Aya quite a lot. There are 8 key artworks of her from this time, and each of them use varying techniques, showing us that Nomura really was finding his way. In this illustration, where she isn't wearing a t-shirt under her jacket, we can see that while she's realistically proportioned, her facial features resemble the anime style of Final Fantasy VII. A few of these illustrations are reminiscent of what Nomura might create for Final Fantasy VIII, leaning into the realistic side of his art style. A couple of illustrations even use the thick lines he had just used for Ehrgeiz, with the watercolor-adjacent coloring he would make use of in the early 2000s. As you can also see by these artworks, Nomura tends to highlight Aya's sex appeal. A year prior, Tifa was given big boobs and sent off into the world, but Nomura's approach to Aya's character feels intentional and calculated, with effort made to depict her as both sexy and cool. Both characters easily fall under the action girl trope, but Tifa's and Aya's designs take opposite approaches to illustrating their sensuality. Tifa's design puts this first, as she is designed like any hot anime girl with exaggerated features to draw spectacle. There's not only emphasis placed on her chest, but also on her waist and legs. As I've said before, thankfully, the writing room for Final Fantasy VII would balance this out and give Tifa a solid characterization. which separates her from some characters she shares these physical tropes with. By contrast, Aya's design is restrained. Her realism, competence, and intelligence give a view of her that is more adult. Of course, her environment contributes to the aspect we're discussing, as being in an apocalyptic setting makes Aya vulnerable. Maeda crushes on her throughout the game, but a majority of the sexual air around her is quiet and subtle, perhaps in an attempt to stay realistic. We can tell that it's there though, considering Nomura's art. To summarize this comparison, Tifa is a character designed with appearance first and character second. Thankfully, her presence in the game's script and the genre of her game help her distance from being one-dimensional. Aya's character is designed with realism first, but uses promotional art and the game's atmosphere to suggest her attractiveness. In a complete inverse from Tifa's scenario, the atmosphere of her world is what highlights her sexuality most. Nomura's work on Parasite Eve gives us a semblance of his pure ideas. Since its realistic setting forces him to suspend his quirkiness, we can get right down to what makes his character design work great. Each character is recognizable and unique without being quadrupedal or asymmetrical. They also wear modern clothing, which would become a pillar in Nomura's influence. Fantasy elements included, Nomura's designs for Parasite Eve are sensible within their lore, and his illustration style follows suit. Parasite Eve was released on March 29, 1998 in Japan, and September 10th that year in North America. Most critiques were reserved for the game's short runtime and long load times. North American copies of the game included a playable demo of Xenogears, and trailers for Brave Fencer Musashi and Final Fantasy VIII. In February and October 1998, Tetsuya Takahashi and Kaori Tanaka's Project Noah would hit store shelves in Japan and North America as Xenogears. Xenogears took an inverse approach to Final Fantasy VII's 3D graphics. 7 used 3D models on pre-rendered 2D backgrounds, but Xenogears used pre-rendered 2D characters in 3D environments. Like the titles Takahashi and Tanaka had done work on prior, the combat in Xenogears was based on the Squaresoft signature ATB system. With this game, Tanaka would begin to go by the pen name Soraya Saga. It's unclear, since both are private about their personal lives, but at some point, Takahashi and Saga married each other. Protagonist Fei Fong Wong has dissociative identity disorder, meaning he has multiple personalities as a result of severe trauma. This has drawn many comparisons with Cloud Strife, who also has identity issues as a result of trauma. In reality, the two are similar at best. Both have mental health issues as a result of intense trauma, but they are different conditions. Fei has DID, and Cloud is an amnesiac. In my research, I have not found anything conclusive that could suggest that Cloud's concept was taken from Soraya Saga's idea for Fei, though it is plausible. I should also add that while Nomura was present in the early days of Xenogears production, he was not on board long enough to contribute to Fei's design. When Nomura left, Kunihiko Tanaka filled his place as character designer. Around the same development window as Parasite Eve, Tetsuya Nomura would illustrate the characters and handle some artwork for Brave Fencer Musashi. This title was an action RPG directed by Yoichi Yoshimoto, following an interpretation of Miyamoto Musashi that goes on an adventure in a world based on food. Protagonist Musashi uses 2 swords in his adventure, a reference to the real-world samurai. Among the historic Miyamoto Musashi's many feats was his use of the Niten Ichiryu technique. This roughly translates to the art of strategy of 2 heavens as one. Most samurai carried 2 blades at all times, referred to as the daisho. Daisho translates to large and small. This consisted of their katana and their wakizashi. The wakizashi is a short blade, typically measuring about 30 to 60 centimeters or 12 to 24 inches. It was typically used as a close quarters weapon, a backup, and sometimes used to commit seppuku. Niten Ichiryu is a style of swordsmanship that wields both katana and wakizashi at once. Musashi famously used this technique in most of his duels, and later in his life opened a school surrounding it. Brave Fencer Musashi uses his 2 blades, Fusion and Lumina, in battle. Fusion is a standard katana. but Lumina is a broad Western-style sword that seems to be as wide as it is tall. This could be a subtle nod to the ore blade once wielded by Miyamoto Musashi. Brave Fencer Musashi was top-down 3D and a platformer puzzle action RPG, another genre Square hadn't tried their hand at yet. This would be the first game soundtrack that Tsuyoshi Sekito would compose for Squaresoft. Hironobu Sakaguchi served as the executive producer on Brave Fencer, and it is likely due to this that Nomura was on board for this title as well. Tetsuya Nomura did not design the characters for Brave Fencer Musashi. However, we can tell, especially after Final Fantasy VII's Chibis, that Nomura did illustrate these characters. Other illustrations were done by character designer Koji Matsuoka, who would later go on to work the same role in Ape Escape 2 and 3. Brave Fencer Musashi released in Japan on July 16, 1998, and in North America on November 12, 1998. Due to the game's setting and gameplay, it was frequently described as a mix between both the Kirby and Legend of Zelda games. The game came pre-packaged with a demo of Final Fantasy VIII. While in Los Angeles, working on Parasite Eve and Brave Fencer Musashi, Nomura would exchange emails with Yoshinori Kitase, drafting concepts for Final Fantasy VIII. The two decided that this Final Fantasy should be lighter in tone. 6 and 7 had been quite dark, and most of Square's side entries at the time were too. To lighten things up, it was decided that the main cast would be a group of students pitted against an evil sorceress, the same evil sorceress sketched for Final Fantasy VII. The students were in place to give the entry a cheerful story. The sorceress was in place to ensure the high fantasy of Final Fantasy was not left behind as the series advanced. As for this project's staff role, 8's team would be largely the same as 7. Shinji Hashimoto worked as producer, Yusuke Naoda as art director, Nobuo Uematsu on the soundtrack as always, along with Yoshitaka Amano around to provide promotional artwork and the game's logo art. Among the new faces in production, Takeshi Arakawa and Tomohiro Hasegawa stand out. Tetsuya Takahashi returned to Final Fantasy as a lead field designer, and though he was occupied with other projects during the production of 7, Hiroyuki Ito also returned to mainline Final Fantasy with 8 and developed the Junction system as a response to 7's Materia system. The project would be helmed by the same power trio behind Final Fantasy VII's writing: Kazushige Nojima, Yoshinori Kitase, and Tetsuya Nomura. This time with significantly less contribution from Hironobu Sakaguchi. Though he had stopped directing Final Fantasy with its 6th entry, Sakaguchi had still remained an integral part of 6 and 7's production. He's credited as an executive producer on Final Fantasy VIII, but admits that he was mainly working on his own project in Hawaii. This was the animated feature film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Inspired by CG technology and film, the goal of The Spirits Within was to continue the pursuit of cinematic quality in the company's games. It was intended to be a case study on CG animation that could be reapplied, likely in Final Fantasy X or XI, as Sakaguchi speculated before the release of 8. Everything about Final Fantasy VIII had to be bigger than before. Yusuke Naoda would go on record saying, "We were determined not to be outdone by the achievements of Final Fantasy VII. Our ultimate rival was our own work from Final Fantasy VII." The team even planned on using 4 CD-ROM discs instead of 3, which came to fruition. They took a quality over quantity approach with 8's side content to avoid the sporadic nature of 7's minigames. The brighter tone and reintroduction of high fantasy elements were another way the team made an effort to stand out against 7. Thankfully, furthering the technological advancements of Final Fantasy VII, Parasite Eve's graphical feats served as a launching point for Final Fantasy VIII. Full-size character models were a goal from the beginning of development per Kitase, which would once again allow Nomura's designs to include more detail than previously possible. Though he was hard at work as the director of The Spirits Within, which itself was the first photorealistic computer-animated film, Sakaguchi wasn't fond of the full-size character models in 8, and would later comment that the cartoonish art style and return to chibi models in Final Fantasy IX was him fighting back against Final Fantasy VIII. As he crafted the plot for The Spirits Within, he was simultaneously working on the first draft of Final Fantasy IX, staying an ocean's length away from 8. Tetsuya Nomura took another step forward in his credited work by directing the iconic opening cutscene to the game. The cutscene's title, Liberi Fatali, is Latin for Fated Children. Speaking of cutscenes, Final Fantasy VIII would introduce motion capture animation in its FMV cutscenes, further pushing the graphical fidelity of the Final Fantasy series than had been done before. This would entail a hiring process to find talent that could perform the motion that was to be animated in-game. Notable names here would be Mayuko Aoki and Masakazu Morita. Aoki performed the motion capture for both Idea Kramer and Rinoa Hartley, and Morita performed the capture for Zell Dinkt, his professional debut as an actor. But way before that, the characters had to be created. Nomura was constantly making adjustments on his male characters this time around, as Yoshinori Kitase often had notes. All of Nomura's characters end up looking like pretty boys. We asked him to rough up the design for several of them, he would recount in an interview. The most notable example of this back and forth is protagonist Squall Leonhard. In an attempt to capture realism, Nomura decided to base this game's protagonist on the late actor River Phoenix. Beginning with this choice, Nomura would start to embrace his fascination with contemporary pop culture and fashion by integrating them in his characters. We'll see this appear a few times in this project alone before going on to define his work. The first draft of Squall had long, unkempt hair and a scar on his face. He wanted this protagonist to feel less fantastical than Cloud, so his hairstyle was kept relatively realistic, while the scar ensured Squall remained visually distinctive. After taking notes from Kitase, Nomura would rough up Squall by giving him a shorter haircut with the scar remaining. The trick here was, River Phoenix has sported both a long and short haircut, so Nomura could still use him as a reference. Despite being short, Squall's hair is not spiked to unrealistic proportions, and his curtain bangs make way to highlight the scar on his forehead. Squall's first name is defined as a sudden gust of wind, and his last name, Leonhard, is a reference to the character from Final Fantasy II. Not only this, but Leon is Greek for lion, the animal depicted on Squall's Griever charms and, as we know by now, Nomura's favorite animal. Right off the bat, Squall's bomber jacket indicates that the street fashion of Parasite Eve had stuck with Nomura. That is to say, Parasite Eve likely opened his eyes to just how much modern fashion he could include in a given design. He even added fur lining on the coat's collar. Littered throughout Squall's design are an abundance of silver accessories, a seasoning he would become notorious for as his use of it continued. One of Squall's accessories is his Griever chain, which depicts a lion's head over top of a cross. Regarding his fur lining and chain, I'd like to insert the popular fan speculation that Squall's outfit may have taken inspiration from Gact, the frontman of the Visual Kei band Malice Miser. The Visual Kei movement is a niche J-rock genre that focuses on its visuals as much as its music, derivative of the Western glam rock movement. In March 1998, the popular band Malice Miser released their third album, Merveille. Of the many outfits Gact wore during this time, one bears a striking resemblance to Squall's outfit and, thanks to his haircut, a slight similarity in likeness. This has been speculated by fans for years, but never confirmed by Tetsu himself. Allegedly, Gact referred to Squall as Gact No. 2 in a TV program to reference this, but I cannot find this clip. What I did find was an official figure of Gact dressed as Squall, released exclusively to fans in 1999. Squall's signature gun blade was given a chain dangle with a similar pendant, something Nomura had first conceived for Cloud's Buster Sword. Squall's design is the first example of Nomura's trademark usage of belts. Squall wears 3 belts around his waist, 2 of which intersect in an X pattern, another frequent Nomura trick. He also wears 3 belts on his thigh. I speculate that this could have been partly inspired by Michael Jackson's appearance on the cover of his 1987 album Bad. Despite their undeniable style, Squall's accessories and fur lining were also partially chosen by Nomura in order to challenge the character animation team. Regarding Squall's characterization, Nomura had this to say.
In the beginning, I was going to make Squall a reticent character, but as another team member pointed out, that would make him the same as another character from Final Fantasy VII, Cloud. We had to differentiate the two, so the scriptwriter and I decided to make Squall initially quiet, but when a subject interests him, he will talk a lot. It's those kinds of details that went into fleshing out characters.
Yoshinori Kitase's original script concept for Final Fantasy VII involved both a father and son, campaigning through different time periods with direct consequences to choices made on either end of the story. This may have subtly been adapted to the dynamic between Cloud and Zack, but in Final Fantasy VIII, it was truly given the old college try. Laguna Loire, Squall's dad, was then designed as a parallel to Squall. His design would seem to quote some concepts in the early sketches for Squall. Despite this, Nomura paid attention to details and designed Laguna to contrast with Squall in certain ways in order to augment their personalities. This parallel is central to the story of Final Fantasy VIII and shows from a developmental standpoint how no leftovers from 7 went to waste. Even the social interactions between Laguna and his comrades, Ward and Kiros, were based on the real-world social dynamic of the team when they were working on Final Fantasy VII. This showcases an intentional undertone in Final Fantasy VIII, duality. Several interpersonal connections in Final Fantasy VIII are designed as parallels, and are all mostly central to pushing the plot forward. To be different from the last rival character he had designed for Final Fantasy, Nomura needed someone more human to fill the role for VIII. This was the design framework for Cypher Almasi. At first glance, he seems to be a repeat attempt at creating Rufus Shinra, thanks to his white trench coat, use of a gun-adjacent weapon, and his slicked-back blonde hair with some strands poking out from his hairline. But Cypher's personality is far removed from Rufus's cold attitude. He leans more into a classic bully archetype. Unlike Sephiroth's apathetic and almost inhuman presence, Cypher is emotional and reckless, making him feel much more human and relatable as Squall's rival. He wears a large trench coat, donning the cross of St. James on either sleeve. Also known in Spanish as the Cruz de Santiago, this emblem was used by the Order of Santiago, a Catholic military order active during the Reconquista, the 781-year-long conflict between Christian kingdoms and Muslim-ruled territories in Iberia that lasted from 711 to 1492. The symbol's cross shape resembles a sword, a subtle design choice to symbolize both the valor and faith of the order. Squall's Griever accessories also resemble the Cross of St. James, though they replace the top with a lion's head. Cypher's posse, Raijin and Fujin, were first created for Final Fantasy VII, but were scrapped to avoid thematic overlap with the Turks. Their names refer to the gods of thunder and wind in Shinto mythology. In Japanese mythology and Buddhist iconography, the two are almost always depicted together as a duo. Fujin is the god of wind, traditionally shown carrying a large sack of winds over his shoulders, while Raijin is the god of thunder and lightning, often surrounded by taiko drums that he beats to create thunder. This translates nicely into their eponymous Final Fantasy VIII characters. Raijin is loud, aggressive, and physically imposing. He absorbs any lightning damage done to him in battle and makes use of the thunder spell while fighting. His special attack, Raijin Special, is named Thunder God Flying Dragon Ascent in Japanese. Fujin is quiet, reserved, and only speaks in one-word sentences. She absorbs any wind damage done to her in battle and makes use of wind magic. Her chakram, a throwing weapon from the Indian subcontinent, makes use of flowy spiral designs that allude to iconography related to the mythological Fujin's Bag of Winds. While they're based on myths, the duo were also conceptualized based on shonen manga. Shonen manga are specifically manga that are aimed toward young boys. It's easily the most popular genre of anime and manga, including some of the most recognizable anime IP. This influence clues us into another avenue Nomura draws from for inspiration, and it also helps brighten the tone of Final Fantasy VIII. Cypher's bully archetype, combined with Raijin and Fujin as his lackeys, reinforces the classic terrible trio trope. Compare the three of them to Draco Malfoy, Vincent Crabbe, and Gregory Goyle from the Harry Potter books, or Team Rocket from the Pokemon animated series. Playing on familiar tropes like these helps lighten the story's tone, since they are commonly used in media centered around children and teenagers. Squall's and Cypher's weapon of choice, the Gunblade, was born from Nomura's idea of allowing the player to have a new way to control the protagonist's weapon in battle. With this new invention, players can deal extra damage if they press the R1 button on impact. This will trigger Squall to fire a blank within his blade, making the weapon vibrate and deal more damage. As silver accessories were a dominant accent piece on Squall's design, his gunblade was made silver too. It was modeled after a revolver, likely a Colt Python. To parallel Squall, Cypher wields his own gunblade. This weapon is known as Hyperion. Hyperion is the name of the Greek Titan god of wisdom. Cypher's Hyperion is modeled after the Beretta M9 pistol. Squall's and Cypher's designs are made to contrast in many ways, beginning with their matching scars that they inflict on each other in the Liberi Fatali sequence. The two both don a Cruz de Santiago, though Squall's are decorated with a lion's head emblem. The two carry the same weapon, and Cypher wears a large white trench coat and collar, while Squall wears mostly black. This is another example of duality in the game. The opening cutscene, mastheaded by Nomura, is based on the concept of morning practice, a before-school activity where student-athletes start the day by practicing their sport or activity early. Liberi Fatali is directed in a way that leads the viewer to believe the stakes are much higher until it is revealed that Cypher and Squall are students. This captures the essence of the game perfectly, as it carries the thrill of high fantasy duels, introduces the iconic gunblade, gives Squall and Cypher their scars, and subverts the audience's expectations by the end. Nobuo Uematsu had proven quite a feat when incorporating a Latin chorus into Sephiroth's final boss fight in Final Fantasy VII. As if to prove that Final Fantasy VIII was made to surpass VII, the first notes of the game's soundtrack are from a Latin choir. While on the topic of music, Final Fantasy VIII was the first instance of a Square game featuring a pop vocal song as its theme song. The song, Eyes on Me, was composed by Uematsu with lyrics by Kako Someya and performed by Chinese recording artist Fei Wong. The track was composed by Uematsu in order to capture the love between Rinoa and Squall. Instead of composing a main theme and individual character themes, as was done with VII, Uematsu put all his chips on Eyes on Me, justifying this by commenting, "It is reasonable to have character themes if each of the main characters have their own highlights in the game, but in FF8, the main character is focused on a single couple of Squall and Rinoa. Considering Eyes on Me, I let the other characters take a step back music-wise." Rinoa Heartily was a large pillar in Final Fantasy VIII's development, as the team intended to explore a Final Fantasy narrative with more emotion and a budding romance. Nomura was very exact with Rinoa's likeness, and spent much time deliberating on it. After completing it, he would hover around Nojima as he wrote her, with frequent notes.
Rinoa was just going to be a contrasting character to Squall, just to make them different, a darker history versus a cheerful brightness. So we started to make her cheerful, but then also made her have weaknesses that Squall would have to compensate for. This is the type of fleshing out of characters that goes into the game. The details don't come out all at once. We worked on them as the story progresses. We completed them as the story was completed.
Since Squall's origin was River Phoenix, much speculation has been made as to who Rinoa could be inspired by. The truth is that Rinoa is based on a close female friend and co-worker. She, too, owned an Australian Shepherd, which would inspire Angelo's appearance alongside her. The woman in question remains anonymous. Rinoa marks the third Final Fantasy in a row to feature a character that fights with a dog at the behest of Nomura. This shows his tendency to repeat designs, which we'll only pick up from here. The crux example of duality as it is used in Final Fantasy VIII is the dynamic between Squall and Rinoa. It's pretty glaring considering the game's logo. This pairing is reinforced throughout the game, which consistently frames Squall and Rinoa as emotional opposites whose relationship anchors the story. Nearly every layer of Final Fantasy VIII's presentation has Rinoa and Squall's relationship at top priority. With Squall, Cypher, and Rinoa, we can see Nomura's first test using iconography to symbolize characters. Squall's icon is his lion's head emblem, Cypher's is the Red Cross of St. James, and Rinoa's is a set of angel wings. These appear on the back of her duster cardigan. Angelic imagery is frequent in her design. Her dog is named Angelo, an Italian name meaning angel. Her second limit break attack depicts her growing angel wings and levitating before greatly buffing her. Thirdly, a white feather is frequently used to symbolize her or her presence in the cinematics of Final Fantasy VIII. Nomura's use of iconography is solidified when taking a closer look at the international box arts of the game. The North American art depicts Squall, Rinoa, and Cypher explicitly. The Japanese box art is white, featuring the logo and a slipcover that uses Squall's lion's head emblem, Cypher's cross of St. James, and Rinoa's angel wing over top of the art. Players of Final Fantasy VIII will find that they cannot rename the rest of Squall's party. This was an intentional move to make sure the player remained focused on the romance between Squall and Rinoa. Yoshinori Kitase would rationalize this by saying, "I think there's a lot of people who like naming them after themselves and the person they like. And since Kistis is the first female character who shows up in this game, it could become problematic later in the game if the player gave her their girlfriend's name. In that case, they'd end up hooking up with a different woman from the one with their girlfriend's name. Because of that, we decided to make Squall and Rinoa the only ones whose names you can change." Additionally, removing the player's ability to name any other characters except for Squall and Rinoa also helps to make the remaining party members feel like a supporting cast, rather than a big ragtag group as was done in Final Fantasy VII. This approach gives another element of typical coming-of-age films to the story of Final Fantasy VIII. Selphie Tilmit was one of the earlier characters to be designed. Her flip hairstyle was the first idea. Her outfit only went through 2 drafts, the first being a pair of overalls and the second being a yellow miniskirt. The overalls from Design 1 carried into Design 2. Kistis Trape was designed around the same time as Selphie. The main conflict Nomura encountered while working on them was which one of them would wear pants or a skirt. Technically both wear skirts, but Kistis' is over pants. Nomura turned the two in and was surprised to find the writing team had decided Kistis to be a teacher at Balaam Garden. He eventually came to terms with this, justifying that foreigners normally look older. The party's martial artist, Zell Dinkt, was designed to be in line with the shonen manga protagonist. This, along with Raijin and Fujin, is a great full-circle moment for Nomura. Any sketches he'd made before that involved storyboarding resembled manga panels, and with 3 characters designed based on the medium, one could say that Nomura got his dream of being a manga artist, albeit in an indirect way. Zell's tattoo was influenced by an MTV clip that Nomura saw depicting a man with a full-body tattoo. Fan speculation sometimes quotes Mike Tyson. However, Tyson did not get his iconic tattoo until 2003. My best guess regarding this music video might be Malice Miser's music video for their single Illuminati. The single was released on May 20th, 1998, and had certainly been in Nomura's wheelhouse of inspiration on this project before. The only reason I'm not entirely sure is because there was only one short shot featuring guitarist Cozy wearing eye makeup in a design similar to the look of Gene Simmons of Kiss. This is just a guess though. Zell's ultimate weapon is named Ehrgeiz, a reference to the 1998 fighting game, and he also shares a few limit break names with Tifa from Final Fantasy VII. Zell's final look is an interesting case, as we'll see several different individual ideas used on his design reused well into Nomura's career. Because of his pretty boy design tendencies, Nomura constantly found himself making alterations to Irving's design. In fact, when Yoshinori Kitase referenced these tendencies in the aforementioned interview, Irving was the example he chose to highlight. First, he was too handsome and similar to Squall. Then, he was a little too close to Final Fantasy VII's Cid Highwind. To distance him from this similarity, his goggles were swapped out for a cowboy hat, and with that, his final design fell into place. Final Fantasy VIII Cid is based on Kazushige Nojima. Nojima requested this, and thus created Cid, but Nomura designed him and found himself hurriedly getting rid of any wrinkles on Cid's design after learning how old, or rather young, the character was going to be. It could be chalked up to 90s trends, but I've seen a wonderful comparison by Andrew Blewett in his Final Fantasy VIII retrospective that points Squall and Cid to Will Hunting and Sean Maguire from the 1997 film Good Will Hunting. The comparison is hard to ignore once pointed out. Like Will Hunting, Squall is emotionally withdrawn, defensive, and uncomfortable with vulnerability, and Cid believes in him, gives him chances, and also frequents a sweater vest. Yet another, though likely coincidental, allusion to coming-of-age media. Idea Kramer was the first designed character for the game, going back to Final Fantasy VII. She was one of the founding concepts for the themes of Final Fantasy VIII. Her design carried the goal of bringing high fantasy back to the Final Fantasy series, and rightfully so, considering she was inspired heavily by Yoshitaka Amano's characters. The game's final antagonist, Ultimecia, takes even more notes from Amano's art style. Her design contrasts with Rinoa's, as the two are sorceresses with opposite alignments. Rinoa wears blue, and Ultimecia wears red. Rinoa's hair is black, and Ultimecia's is white, another duality. There are also some subtle Nomurian monster touches. Her arms resemble the ones used for Mitochondria Eve's final form, as does the general shape of Ultimecia's final form. Her design in this form takes on more of a monstrous appearance than the Holy One. The design includes wings, which look rather skeletal and would come up about 10 years later in a different project. Ultimecia's design is rather veiny and has traces of sinew all throughout. This is a pretty big step in his monster design and would also float around for this time period. Final Fantasy VIII's lore is heavily centered around Guardian Forces, the entry's take on the summons featured in previous Final Fantasy titles. They are the core of the game's junction system, letting the player equip summoned entities to characters to grant abilities and to modify stats. One of these Guardian Forces is Odin, whose defeat at the hands of Cypher leads to the sudden appearance of Gilgamesh. Rather than functioning as a standard Guardian Force, Gilgamesh replaces Odin as a random assist in battle. He is implied to be the same character first seen in Final Fantasy V, having traversed dimensions after being cast into the interdimensional rift. And from this point on, he would go on to appear intermittently throughout the series. Upon review, of all the Final Fantasy games Nomura's worked on, I'd argue that VIII is probably the most Nomurian, so to speak. When one knows his later work, this game begins to be full of 100% pure Nomura. This is largely due to the debut of silver accessories, the gunblade, unnecessary belts, and reverence for pop culture and real-world fashion. But thanks to the other facets, such as iconography, tattoos, and a continued use of mythology, Final Fantasy VIII acts as a debut for Tetsuya Nomura's true style. While he developed this working on Parasite Eve, by the time that Final Fantasy VIII came around, he had a strong sense of his preferences, art style, and design choices. Final Fantasy VIII would release in 1999 and go on to be the fourth best-selling game of the Sony PlayStation, behind Gran Turismo, Final Fantasy VII, and Gran Turismo II in that order. As the follow-up to the smash hit of 7, Final Fantasy VIII stepped up to the plate and hit a home run of its own. The game's setting, narrative, and themes resonated well with audiences, as well as the gameplay and soundtrack. This, combined with its graphical advancements and furthered cinematic presentation, set up Final Fantasy VIII to bolster the series' reputation for being top of the line. In the Western market, 7 had put Final Fantasy on the map, and 8 quickly followed it up and reinforced that success for the franchise.
Final Fantasy VIII coming to a home theater near you. PlayStation.
After wrapping production, development for the next Final Fantasy was being handled by a different team. So, the company flew Nomura out to France to work with Callisto Entertainment on their upcoming game, Dark Earth II: Edge of Chaos. After Nicolas Gaume, the founder of Callisto, had failed to strike a publishing deal with Enix, Square requested a meeting with him and agreed to publish the game so long as Nomura was brought on board to handle the characters. The original draft of the game was a PC game, like its predecessor, Dark Earth, and had its own pre-existing characters. When Square entered the picture, the project scope was altered to be for PlayStation and feature Nomura's work. His design work here made frequent use of harnesses, belts, and buckles. In a way, it's classic Nomura, but with the Middle Ages restraint. The designs are similar to the ones found in Final Fantasy VIII, but not because of the material of the clothes. After wrapping up work with Callisto, Nomura headed home to help Parasite Eve II finish production before deadline. Meanwhile, Xenogears was well received worldwide, and fans were curious whether a sequel would be produced. However, after coming to terms that Squaresoft would rather pursue the Final Fantasy series than develop another Xenogears, and with the upcoming Parasite Eve II putting salt in that wound, Tetsuya Takahashi and Soraya Saga resigned from their roles at the company. After working for Squaresoft for around 9 years, the power couple sought funding from Namco, and through their support established Monolith Soft. After establishing, Takahashi, Saga, and their small team would begin work on a spiritual successor to Xenogears. Before leaving Square, Takahashi had done work he would later be credited for on The Bouncer and Final Fantasy X. Relentless audience comparison between Resident Evil and Parasite Eve had caught up to Squaresoft. It seemed a smart move to make a follow-up to Parasite Eve in response to this comparison. Luckily, the company had recently employed just the right guy for the job. After wrapping work on Einhänder, Kenichi Iwao and the rest of the team behind the side-scrolling shooter were tasked with creating a new follow-up to Parasite Eve that would consider both the original novel and the 1998 video game. The key reason for such a large switch-up in personnel is that PE2 began development as a spin-off and not a direct sequel. Iwao had been told by the higher-ups, "There's no need to make it as big as the first game. Just create an action RPG with the budget and manpower made available to you." And so he did. He was even able to crop up some fellow ex-Resident Evil staff. This new Parasite Eve project was going to follow a private investigator, Kyle Madigan, uncovering deeper mysteries about the evolution of the human brain and emotion. There were plans to feature human prototypes that would have been genetically engineered to be specialized in hearing, sound, and smell. This new protagonist, Kyle, would allow the narrative to explore the phenomenon of Aya Brea objectively. Kyle would also be an ordinary guy, leaving room for contrast between the characters. Though it seemed to be a walk in the park at first, development for Parasite Eve II quickly became a constant uphill battle. Midway through production, the idea to include Aya as a more involved character would result in Kyle being kicked out of his protagonist role and the project turning from spin-off to sequel. Reflecting on the struggle, Iwao said, "Since our staff was originally working on 2D shooting games, we lacked both the number of people and necessary experience. Also, as the company's financial performance worsened halfway through development, we had to have our team. Moreover, due to delays in other main titles, we were ordered to accelerate the release by 6 months during the late development stage." Like Parasite Eve, the Parasite Eve II team initially had a different character designer. This was Isao Oishi, the main character designer for Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. Ishii quit amongst the chaos, and so Tetsuya Nomura was called in 10 months from deadline to fill the role. Thus, Tetsuya Nomura stumbled into Parasite Eve II's hectic development, credited on the game as character illustrator. Nomura did his best to preserve Oishi's work, and added some small touches of his own before illustrating all of the artwork, as he had done for Parasite Eve prior. The cast of Parasite Eve II is much smaller than before. This size largely has to do with the original scope for the project. In Nomura's workflow, Parasite Eve II occurred concurrently with The Bouncer and just after Final Fantasy VIII. We can triangulate this by nods left in the final product and its branding. Golem No. 9's main weapon is Squall's Gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII, and is the hardest obtainable weapon in the game. On the other end, Nomura drew some promotional artwork of Aya in a tube top with Dog Street brand jeans, a fictional fashion line referencing The Bouncer. This artwork clues us in to how much of Oishi's original designs were left over, and how interested Nomura was in including fashion in his designs at the time. We'll discuss Dog Street further later, but for now, take note that on Aya's back pocket is a cross, the emblem Nomura was experimenting with in the designs for Final Fantasy VIII. Nomura would once more create several promotional artworks of Aya for Parasite Eve II, but this time his art style was more consistent between pieces. In this piece, she can be seen with wings on her back and a silver cross dangling from a chain out of her mouth. The line work, coloring, Aya's vacant expression, wings, and silver accessories, this piece calls to mind the work Nomura had just done for Final Fantasy VIII. A notable piece used for magazine ads was Nomura's second take on one done for the original. This time, however, elements from another artwork made for the 1998 game are used as references, providing the basis for the color scheme, possibly influencing the change in pose, and definitely inspiring her waistband to be folded over. Aya's eyes are even more realistic than both reference pieces. In another, she is naked, censored by shadows, and has mutilated bodies at her feet. This art is characterized by thick outlines and a bold coloring scheme, something that Nomura would heavily lean into as he drafted designs for his next and biggest project yet. Despite its tumultuous development, Parasite Eve II was released on December 16, 1999, 10 months after the release of Final Fantasy VIII. The game's localized copies would roll out throughout the year 2000, as would the company's final wave of original titles for the PlayStation. After being in development since 1997, Callisto Entertainment's Dark Earth 2: Edge of Chaos, now simply named Silent Chaos, was complete and ready for its release on the PlayStation. But the absolute worst-case scenario came true for the French development team. As Hironobu Sakaguchi's Final Fantasy The Spirits Within began to take more time and money to create, Square would have to cancel projects and tighten game budgets to stay fiscally afloat. This affected Parasite Eve II harshly, as we've discussed. This, hand in hand with the PlayStation 2's upcoming release in 2000, led to Silent Chaos being cancelled by Square, despite being complete and fully playable. No copies of the game were leaked or made public, so Silent Chaos died quietly, and has been lost media ever since. All that remains are only a few CG models, some sketches, and some background art.
As the 90s came to a close, Tetsuya Nomura found his true illustration style, and began to pick up some new design habits with his work on Parasite Eve and Final Fantasy VIII. The success of both of these titles would catapult him even further, making his work quite relevant in the industry and opening him up to many projects that he would not have been involved in before. As soon as he hit a stride with Final Fantasy VII, Nomura did not let up. By doing this, he involved himself in many projects that pushed the PlayStation much further beyond what was done in Final Fantasy VII, allowing him to open up and establish what his natural art style looked like. Rather than sitting back and let the cash roll in, Nomura opted to find himself, which brought more praise. It's a good reminder to hone your craft and not get too comfortable, as for some, selling out is not fulfilling. My name is Joe. I have talked. Thanks for watching.